Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Robin Donaldson, clinical psychologist and co-founder of Solace Club. Today on Solace Show, I have some very exciting guests. But before we get into that, just to remind folks what Solace Show is all about and the link to Solace Club. So for longtime viewers, Solace Show, we talk about things that other folks don't like to talk about. The very upbeat topics of death, dying, grief, those types of things. But also it's not just, sitting down in the puddle of the dark. It's how to work through the issues that you have, things that will help family and friends after you're gone, even while you were grieving. So that is the point of the show, and our official sponsor is Solace Club, of which I'm a co-founder, no surprise there, and we provide care packages for people in grief. So instead of simply sending the typical flowers that wilt and die and have to be taken care of anyway, these are things that you can give people that psychologists curated, psychologist being me, curated to help in dealing with the emotional and physical pieces of grief. So very awesome segue. As we know, grief impacts both the mental as well as the physical parts of us. I had the wonderful privilege of being introduced to the Bosons, who are with me today on the show, and this amazing program that they have started called Trauma Recovery Yoga. Wow, I almost blinked there for a second.
We would help you.
Oh, I appreciate that. And so to give a little background of how I was introduced and my involvement, just to be transparent with all the viewers here, is in getting involved with yoga and my own personal experience with grief, which many viewers know about, with my husband passing away about 4 years ago. Yoga was very instrumental in how I process things, got my anger and frustration out, just moved my body again after losing my husband, although I didn't lose him. He was dead. Always those euphemisms, right, that we are working to move past as a culture. But I wasn't really sure how or why the yoga was working, but I knew that it was working. And as part of wanting to help people in grief, I wanted to provide a yoga for grief piece, and all of the fabulous networking, I found the program that they were doing, and I wanted to learn more about it. And they can tell you more about what workshops and things that they're offering. I had the fantastic opportunity to take one of the workshops and found it very educational. You all know that I love science, I love facts, I'm a sponge for all that type of stuff, and so these two really provided that piece, and are hilarious to boot, well-rounded individuals, and just have such an important message and passion that they are really bringing to our community at a time, especially when we have needed it the most. So with that background, let me introduce, I have Darwin here on my left, and then to his left is Joyce. So at this point, just kind of talk about, I'll let you all talk about TRY, and we didn't flip a coin before the show to see who would start, but I trust that y'all can figure that piece out. But tell us a bit more about TRY.
Well, TRY itself is Trauma Recovery Yoga. We are facilitating emotional intelligence and healing in the community through training people in a somatic therapy that's all based in science. So we call it yoga, but you could take that piece out. There's a whole lot more to it. It's a method that helps to bring the central nervous system back in balance. I'm starting to speak science now. Are you proud of me?
I'm very impressed.
I
yes.
learned it all from Science Boy, Bill Nye, my husband here. But it's, the method is to bring back the central nervous system back in balance after a traumatic event, or for people that live in crisis.
So what we knew is that we knew that there was a physical aspect to trauma, and there was some positive changes that were happening, and Joyce will cover her story a little bit, but even to the people that she was working with, that we were seeing, and so that she was working with. And so through the research, we were able to not only find evidence of why these changes were happening for these folks, sometimes even miraculous changes in their connection with themselves and physical movements, but the research to even fine-tune what we were providing out there in the community. So it was not only, it was really started off, the launching pad was yoga, and then science and evidence-based research was really what helped to evolve the method, the trauma recovery yoga method, into what it is today, and the different aspects of what it is.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that I appreciated about the workshop and the program is that you are very transparent about that. You are open to shifting, changing, tweaking as is needed based on the research and the impacts of yoga on mental health, at least in the mental health field. And you probably know about a lot of other research, but it's taking off. There's so many people now that are doing research on yoga and how it's impacting, that I see this field definitely growing in the near future, even more so than it already is.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, actually, when we started out, it was the whole thing came about from my own trauma, and I was diagnosed with PTSD after my son died in a tragic accident, and he was in the Navy, lost his legs from a train, and then I was at his bedside for 9 days as he passed. Then my diagnosis with PTSD and my unwillingness to be zombied out by Xanax and other medications.
Because that was what was being offered to you at that time?
That's what was being offered to me.
Okay.
As a Gold Star mom, then you get therapy. It's the free thing that you get.
Through the military?
Yes. So that was definitely a safety net at the time, kept me from, because I was having suicidal thoughts for sure. But I wanted something else because I needed to be better for my remaining children and the other people that counted on me on this planet. So I found my way to the mat, and then with the help of people like Darwin and Science Based, I was already a yoga teacher, so it became based in yoga. But all the other tools, like when you discover grief, when it's inside of you and not outside of you,
right.
It's a whole different feeling, a whole different lesson, and so he's looking for tools like your. I love your product.
Thank
First
you.
of all, I wish someone would have sent that to me. There's such limited resources for people suffering
Right.
in any kind of, because trauma always holds loss, whether that's grief, a loss of a loved one, it could be your innocence, it could be a job, it could be your home, it's a loss. So
this was one of
grief,
the things that I totally connected with you about when we were talking, even before I took the workshop, was how there is this, to say beautiful sounds a little weird with the topic, but there is the Venn diagram of the overlap between what is traumatic is loss, and what is loss, especially in any type of grief, is traumatic in one way, shape, or form. And so we do the work, the very similar type of work, because of that overlap. And I agree, I think that it is integral to both aspects, to the trauma and to the grief. Now, you mentioned your own personal experience, and having been a yoga instructor, did you find that it was more challenging doing yoga as you did before loss versus after?
And that's why I say it was originally based in yoga, but we picked up all these other tools, and then with Darwin's research, and then Nicole Anders from the VA, she's a trauma psychologist, Dr. Anders, who helped, kind of help me understand why it was working. But when I went to public yoga classes, I was so triggered in those spaces. So it is a form of yoga, or there is the movements are yoga based, but there's so much else that is not yoga, or things that are typically yoga were taken out because I was triggered by a dark room. I was triggered by my back being to the door. I was triggered by being touched. I was triggered by being called out. I was triggered by Bob Marley music because that was my son's favorite artist, and things like that. So I wanted to take out those pieces and then implement other pieces that I knew had helped me, with the tools that I had picked up along the way. Many are similar to what you offer people in your boxes too. And so when we talk now, it's not a yoga teacher training, because once we knew that we had something, we knew that there were more people that needed it. And he was the one that told me, you have something.
Mm-hmm.
Because I was doing it for me,
Right.
then I was doing it for a few other places, and then I would come home and tell him, these people in this traumatic brain injury patient spoke today that didn't speak before.
Oh,
This vet
wow.
found out where his foot was, who didn't know where his foot was before because he was disassociated with his body, things like that.
Yeah, we would, when she would tell me stories of that, then I would say things such as, oh, well, what you're talking about is neuroplasticity, because they were imagining they were moving that part of their body, even whether it was there or was a phantom movement or whatever, they were reconnecting those parts of their brain that hadn't been used for a long time, and or rerouting that information. So that neuroplasticity is a huge part of the change in either a person's orientation to their own body that comes through the method, and or a change in their orientation, more importantly, to the entire world. So their orientation to how they interact with individuals outside of them and how they interact with themselves is fundamentally changed to the work.
All right. Now, for those of us that may or may not know what neuroplasticity means,
So
could you talk
sure.
a little bit about that?
So our brain's full of neurons, and when we're born up to the age of 7, it creates billions of neurons. And as we get older, for efficiency purposes, because obviously the part of our brain that consumes the most amount of calories, consumes the most amount of energy is our brain, so it needs to be more efficient. So it starts pruning these neurons in our brain.
Naturally.
Yeah, naturally pruning to become more efficient. Those neurons are still there, they're still available, they're just not being utilized. Basically, they're being shut down. So with neuroplasticity, when we start doing new activities, such as positive thoughts about ourselves, positive thoughts about the world, or movement that we hadn't done before, or even learning how to play guitar, we're reigniting these neurons that were there, that have always been there. And evidence is showing that we can actually create new neurons. For the longest time, we felt that the brain stopped developing at the age of, 16 roughly. And we found that throughout our life, the brain can create new neurons and then reignite neurons.
Recently.
This,
So that's
this is
neuroplasticity.
very, very new, because even when I was in graduate school, they were
Yeah.
not talking about this.
Right.
The old understanding was, you're born with a certain number and forget it. If you lose it, you lose it. Good luck with the rest of your life, type of a thing.
Yeah, a big thing that we talk about with the work we're doing is we all may have a diagnosis, but that is not the prognosis for how we're going to end up. And that's where neuroplasticity comes in, and changing our orientation to the world comes in. We're not stuck with who we are today. We can always change that. And we see that just by the fact that if you only speak one language, we all know, we can learn a second. It just takes effort.
Right.
And if we're dealing with trauma, we're dealing with the effects of trauma, those aren't going to be there forever. Now, we are the ones that can actually help the quickness of how we get past that, or through that, I should say, and then also what that looks like on the other end.
Yeah, so the as you can see, there's a lot more to it than
very
moving and breathing on
complicated,
the
right?
mat. But when we talk about research and data that Darwin has done, everything that is in our method, it is proven through data and research. But it's those pieces. Like, we know breath is good for calming the nervous system. We know mantra helps to change our orientation to the world, or our perspective is everything kind of thing. Affirmation for the same reasons. We know yoga can lower everything from cortisol to blood pressure. So all of those pieces put together, then essential oils they're now using in hospitals to alleviate pain.
Right.
So we put all of those things together, and in a seamless kind of movement with breath and keeping people mindful, because we know mindfulness also is proven to increase brain activity and mood. So we put all those things together and call it the TRI method now.
Yeah, and we not only provide that all those tools together in the practice, we provide the knowledge and articulation of that information in the workshops and the classes. So people that take our workshops walk away with an understanding of what happens during a traumatic situation to their brain and their nervous system, and then what's going on when we're activated, and then how do I deal with that, and how do I change that. And that's all based in the research that's already been done, and the evidence-based research that's out there today.
Absolutely, and that is, I think, the difference when people ask me, or when I'm talking about TRI, because they'll say, well, it's yoga. I'm like, well, kind of. And learning all of these different pieces, which if you go to therapy after a loss or after a traumatic event, oftentimes the therapists will talk about mindfulness. They will talk about moving your body, exercising, getting the endorphins going, getting things to help with dealing with the cortisol. And what I really like about Try is that it's a combination of these pieces. And it doesn't stop there. Simply going to one of your workshops is not going to cure everything or magically make all of your symptoms go away. But it definitely, like you were saying, provides that type of a tool.
I think, and if it's practiced regularly, then your body finds it to be the natural inclination. Does that make sense?
It does, and everybody asks, okay, so how much do I have to really do? Like, what are you talking about? Like, for if somebody, I'm just thinking in the grief world specifically, I don't even feel like getting out of bed today.
Oh, I know
and
that
you want
feeling.
me to do yoga or some sort of body movement? So talk to me about the resistance and your thoughts on that, and how folks can overcome that, what they can do.
We get a resistance for a few reasons. First of all, yoga, the word yoga has a negative connotation.
It can.
Some
Yeah.
stigma in certain, especially in certain demographics and social settings like churches or old-fashioned kind of neighborhoods and things like that. So we speak to our audience, or let's even talk about when we bring it to first responders, police and firefighters, and then you call it trauma recovery yoga. They don't want any part of us, right?
Right.
So we don't call it that. We call it total resilience yoga. It's the same exact movement, and the research does show as well that it not only helps to recover from trauma, but it helps to build resilience for a future
possible
How is that?
crisis thing.
Yeah, like what do they show?
Are you going to talk about resilience?
Yeah, I can touch on just the fact that it's preventative. When we look at total resilience or resilience itself, what we're really talking about is if I'm exposed to a critical or a crisis situation, what is my response? Am I reacting physically and emotionally, or am I responding cognitively and emotionally?
And all that will be different based on individual differences, right?
Absolutely. And our body's natural inclination to what we call self-regulate. So what happens is the more often you get in touch with your own self-regulation, and that's where the tools of meditation, breath work, and movement all come in. Those are all affecting our own self-regulation. The more times we reconnect or reassociate with our self-regulation as an activity, the more our body is naturally inclined to self-regulate on its own.
Well, it makes me think of those neurons that, if you're going to do something over and over again, you're going to build that connection, and it'll be reinforced.
Absolutely.
NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, and that's part of the reason it works. And I can speak, I call myself my own best case study, as you know. You've probably heard me say that in the training.
A couple of times.
Yeah, because even just yesterday, was it yesterday? With
Well, it
JoJo?
all depends on where we get the story.
I have a lot of stories. So I practice this, once or twice, maybe even 3 times a week. So 3 times at the high end, 1 time at the minimum, right?
Okay.
And whether it's just in my chair, you can practice this laying down. You don't have to. We have methods that I bring to people with traumatic brain injury, and I have people in a chair, on a mat, or lying down, and they can't move from the neck down, but they can visualize that. So, we're not going to think our way out of bed. Did you say that to me once? There's no way to
No,
think.
that was not me.
Well, it's brilliant though, right? Someone
Yeah,
said it. I think it was on Oprah. You can't think your way out of bed, but you can imagine that you are out of bed, and you can
Right.
fire those same neurons, and you can be inspired by your own breath, and you can lay in bed and do affirmations. You don't have to leave the bed to practice pieces of this. You don't have to do a whole hour. And we are training. Now we find that our trainings are more full of people like you, more full of behavioral people in the behavioral sciences.
That was one of the things I was going to ask,
yeah.
is what people are gravitating towards these workshops.
Yeah, we still get yoga teachers, but more now we get educators, so school teachers, facilitators or faculty of the schools,
Social workers.
social
therapists.
workers, psychologists, all kinds of counselors, and people that want to help their own employees and their own staff. so corporate people.
Corporate,
to-
like HR specifically, or
Yes.
okay,
Yeah.
neat. All right.
To raise morale.
Yep.
So I'm aware that we're at the end of this segment, so we're going to take a break. And when we come back, we'll talk a little bit more about where Tri is heading, and where you might be able to get some more information about what they're doing next. So see you back in a few.